Welcome to Lead with Hope, the podcast where we explore the power of hope, leadership, and resilience in today's world. I'm Brandi Kelly, and each week I will bring you stories, insights, and actionable advice from leaders, innovators, and change makers who are using hope as their compass to navigate challenges, create positive impact, and inspire others to do the same. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just beginning your journey, this podcast is here to remind you that no matter the obstacle, hope is the fuel that can drive transformation. So, let's dive in and discover how you can lead with hope. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lead with Hope podcast. I am your host, Brandi Kelly, and today I'm excited to welcome Craig Williams onto the podcast. Craig is the founder and CEO of Journey12, an organization dedicated to helping schools, especially in rural America. He helps them reclaim their narratives and strengthen community connections through authentic storytelling and strategic communication. A lifelong education advocate, Craig also supports students and families through college admissions and career exploration initiatives. With an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis, he brings decades of experience in economics, branding, and community engagement. Craig lives in Ladue, Missouri with his wife, Shauna, and their 2 children and their 2 golden doodles. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thank you so much, Brandi. I'd really been looking forward to it.
So, Craig, I love asking this first question, and basically all it is your story. So why don't you start off there? Tell us a little bit about your story.
You know, nobody has a short story, Brandi,
No.
but I'll do my best. I think the linchpin to my story is probably the fact that I am an itinerant storyteller. I have become this through a series of circuitous routes that life has taken me on, and all of which have led to wonderful places ultimately, although sometimes they don't appear so wonderful at first. One of the things that I often share with audiences when we first have a chance to sit down and chat is, the unlikely beginnings of my life. I was born in the same hospital on the same day in the same year as John Bon Jovi. Get excited,
wow.
right? Yeah, how about it?
Nice.
So I often kid people. I say, I think we were switched at birth, and somehow he's receiving my royalties. I don't know, but not that that has anything to do with anything. But no, I don't know. I think the best way I could summarize what it is that I do and why I do it is I've always been drawn to the importance of story and the value that that holds in creating connection between people. I've been fortunate in my life. I've sort of, led with a kind of focused ignorance, I'll call it, because not knowing what lies ahead, sometimes we just charge out and do the thing that we want to do or choose to do, never really quite knowing how it's going to land. But I've been fortunate. There have been a lot of good people supporting my landing zones, and as a result of that, I've managed to build some things and create some opportunities for others as well. And along the way, I've discovered that I have this love for storytelling, and particularly where it comes to education and advocacy of education and opportunities for young people.
Yeah, and you do such a great job telling the stories of the schools. During my time as superintendent at Mount Olive School District, you joined me and you shared some beautiful stories about the administrators and the teachers, the alum. So many beautiful stories encapsulated in a magazine that went out into the entire community. And I really appreciated being part of that experience because we don't do a good enough job of sharing the greatness that is happening in our schools and in our districts. And so I know you're passionate about doing that. I'm just curious, Craig, what have been some of the returns on that investment that schools make to share the stories into the communities?
Oh, well, the ROI has been immense. I mean, I can't even begin to capture all of the amazing outcomes that we've had the opportunity just to be a part of.
Mhm.
I will tell you that I've had the opportunity to interview limb different children, children with severe Asperger's and autism diagnoses. I've sat down with students that have been victims of shaken baby syndrome that are living their lives in ways that you could never imagine how inspirational they are to their peers and their families and the people that interact with them in their communities. I've
Mhm.
spoken to students who've knocked out perfect ACT scores, but have challenges just communicating who they are with the world around them. I've talked to kids that are, looking at a career in the skilled trades and are being guided by local dual credit programming or interaction with local mentors. I mean, all of these things result in what I guess maybe I could call the proverbial tree falling in the woods, but guess what? This time somebody's there to hear it
Yeah.
because we're reporting on these things in a way that isn't journalism. It's not classic journalism. I tell our writers and our copy team that, we're not here to just report what we heard or what we saw. We're here to dig deeper and go into a place that is not common for a writer or a storyteller. Um, when we're asked by new folks that are joining our team, well, what kind of writing are we really doing here? How are we putting these stories together? I asked them to imagine journalism, biographical prose,
Mhm.
a bit of long form poetry, there's a little bit of marketing copy, wrapped up in what I would call a love letter to the community. And if you
Mhm.
can imagine that style of writing, that's really what we're aiming for. And maybe aim is the right word because, to attempt to manage a creative process is a bit of an oxymoron. The creative process is somewhat driven by the muse in the room at the moment. And who is that muse and or muse is, and
Mhm.
what is it that the creator brings to bear on that work, on that effort. And I'm not here to direct that in a managerial way. I'm here to help aim that
Yeah.
and set some expectations. But so the outcomes themselves have been tremendous. I mean, we've worked with now, hundreds of different schools and the communities that are served by these schools are the direct beneficiaries of this work.
Mhm.
Uh, I can tell you all kinds of stories about leaders that haven't really known that they want to do this or thought that this is something that's in the budget. And it never is, of course. But neither is landscaping. I'm struck by a piece of advice I was once given by a builder that was putting a building together for a company I was working with. And he said, just make sure you keep budget aside for some landscaping. And I said, why is that a thing? He said, you'll see why it's a thing. And
Mhm.
so landscaping, while it may not seem terribly important in the scheme of creating square footage for a bunch of office occupants, at the end of the day, it's important to everybody that works there to know that their place matters enough to put a few shrubs around it or a couple of box elders or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that landscaping is maybe the right metaphor for why schools need to put a little budget aside for their communications efforts. After
Mhm.
all, if we don't tell somebody about our story, somebody's going to fill that void.
Yeah.
No, not to ramble on here, but we live in an era of constant noise, of kind of information and opinion and outrage and all
Mhm.
the competing attention. It's just a landscape of white noise, and much of it is quite ugly. And so, in that environment, silence is not neutral. It's a vacuum, and it gets filled by somebody else's version of the story. And so, schools have to communicate. They have to communicate with more intention, I think, than ever before. It's not about spinning facts. It's about telling authentic stories and telling them often enough that
Yeah.
people remember what's true.
Mhm.
Because I'm a big believer that in today's world, consistency builds trust more than perfection or statistical accuracy ever will. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And as human beings, we are wired in such a way that when there is that silence or that void of information, we connect the dots and we make it up.
Yes,
And
we do.
so, in order to cast the vision and to get the outcomes that we're striving for, we have to have that communication. We
Yeah.
need to tell our stories. And in doing that, those stories foster hope. They foster belief in yourself, belief in others, belief in the vision that the leader is casting, and it helps us to drive those change efforts that we want to see in our schools.
100%, Brandy. You're making some really good points there. And I know that so much of your work is rooted in this idea of hope and how
Mhm.
that can serve as such a powerful platform. And when I have the opportunity to sit down and listen to a young person
Mhm.
share with me what they're hopeful for,
Right.
and I mean, I leave these interviews both completely energized and completely emotionally exhausted because of, just what the commitment, I guess, that we both have shared, both the person that we're sitting down with in this conversation and then the person kind of conducting the conversation. But it's such a rich tapestry. And this idea of hope is beautiful. And I absolutely love what you're doing with it.
Yeah. And it's a sense of hope, but it's also a system of hope. And so that brings me to my next question. Um, you know, my sense of hope and my system of hope was born out of personal tragedy.
Yeah.
I want to turn that pain point into purpose. So I'm just curious, Craig, is there an adversity or an obstacle or a challenge that maybe you have faced that you are now striving to turn into a purpose in your life?
Well, there's so many. There's so many. I mean, Brandy, I lost my father to suicide when I was 16 years old. And as a function of that, I grieved for years. In the moment, I didn't. I was 16 years old. I had a girlfriend, I had a car, I had distractions. But 3 years after I lost him, I realized just how much I lost. And I sunk into a deep state of depression that was clinical in nature. It sidelined me from, my 20s in a way that, was really desperately cruel and in retrospect just seemingly so unfair. And I've struggled with real resentment to my father for what he did and what he took from us,
Mhm.
and at the same time a real um, heartfelt, kind of I don't know, empathy, compassion, deep sorrow for what he was missing that caused him to make that choice. And I grappled with that for much of my life. Depression, I fortunately never quite got to the place where I self-medicated in a harmful way, but I did seek, medication through the professionals that do that sort of thing, and really struggled to get my bearing and find myself again. It took 10 years,
Yeah.
and but I did, and kind of rebuilt, and life moved on. But that was a sort of a seminal moment in sort of my life, to lose this important person that was everything to you at that moment when maybe he was most needed. So I became this young person that inexplicably found himself less at the parties and less at the gatherings of other people my age and more in the company of the sort of auditory um, um, surrogates of the day that were sharing with me ideas about, seeing the light and seeing the possibility and seeing the way through difficulty.
Mhm.
And some of these people were business leaders. Some of these people were classic sort of positive mental, thinker kinds of people, motivational speakers, people like that. But I listened to their tapes constantly as I drove all over rural Illinois, selling T-shirts. That was my first company that I started, and so I had all these miles to pass and listen to these wonderful surrogate voices that were standing in for my father, in essence. And I listened to their guidance, and it took me places that are, in retrospect, kind of remarkable. And I'm really fortunate for that.
Craig, I didn't know that extent of your story. I knew a little bit of it, but thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable today. I think we can learn so much, and the fact that you have paved the way, it shows that there's hope. You've just given listeners that may be navigating some of those same issues in their life a beacon of hope. So thank you for sharing that today.
Mhm.
And I think about one choice in your life. We make choices every day, but that story really shines a light on the importance of our choices for not only ourselves, but those that we love most in this world. And
Hmm.
one choice can completely change the trajectory of your life and your children's lives and so many people that are watching you because people are watching you. They're watching how you conduct yourself, how you handle adversity and obstacles in life, and they're looking to you to make a choice.
Agreed. I think that we we all are watching and we
Mhm.
all are being watched.
Yeah.
And sometimes to our own detriment. We can push that needle so far that it now becomes social comparison and
Hmm.
other things that are detrimental to the self,
Yeah.
um, and to the community. Um, but
And
there's nothing wrong with observation. It's good to be
no,
observant.
it is very good to be observant. And that's what you do when you tell your stories. You focus only on the good things because, as you mentioned earlier, that social comparison, we get plenty of that in social media.
Right,
And right now, social media has become so negative.
right.
And for some school leaders, teachers, school staff, it really is causing them to feel hopeless.
Yes. It is. There's a funny little phrase I've coined. Oftentimes, and I interview about 16 of the schools we work with. We work with nearly 90 districts now, and I interview with 16 of them. And on the way to my morning interview sessions, I always stop and get my number two combo meal at McDonald's, my sausage, egg, and cheese McMuffin. And I witness the local gathering in whatever community I happen to be headed toward. And if there's not a McDonald's in that community, I generally find one between my home and that place. And there's always the morning meeting. And
Mhm.
I've come to regard this as what I call the McDonald's mafia, because these folks really do run the community. And it's not always a McDonald's. Sometimes it's a local coffee shop or a diner, but you know the places and you know the people, and they replicate across the rural landscape. They're everywhere, and they're often talking about pretty much the same kinds of things, or at least in the same kinds of tone. And that used to be the social media. That was what we had. But now there's this vitriolic kind of a keyboard warrior mindset that has taken hold, and it's particularly nasty, I think, in areas of scarcity where people feel like it's a zero-sum game. If they get it, I'm not going to get it. If my kid doesn't get the spot on the cheer team or on the foot, somebody else's, it's just a desperate sort of a reach for something, for anything, because when you're in scarcity, this is what we do sometimes. It's not the abundance mindset. But what we've discovered, and this is not any sort of brilliant strategizing on my part or anyone's part at Journey 12. It's just something we've discovered as we move forward into this work, is that when we put these magazines in these mailboxes
Mhm.
of these districts, what happened next was something we completely did not expect.
Mhm.
And that is that we began getting letters and emails and personal visits to the school district offices from people who had never really been invited into the school story before. Because as it turns out, in virtually any district, and certainly this is true in rural districts, which is our primary audience, um, only about 25% at the most of our households in those districts have school-aged children living in them.
Yeah.
And what that means is that our districts are really only communicating with those households directly. That's the extent of their digital reach. They're not permitted to spam the other taxpayers that aren't households with children living in them. And those other households are, in fact, the majority. So you have 75 to 80% of your households in any given district that aren't going to receive your digital correspondence. Maybe they'll get the narrative from McDonald's or the coffee shop down the road.
Right.
Maybe it'll be twisted up into a pretzel. Maybe it won't. So what we discovered was these magazines land in a way that's really refreshing, because people look at them and they say, well, holy cow, I haven't been in that school for 46 years. I had no idea that they even had, that chem lab that they'd remade 5 years ago, or that they have AP programming, or that they're doing dual credit, or that they have a welding shop, and people just don't know that there's a CNC table in our building. We had no idea. So these are wonderful realizations and really epiphanies that the public often comes to as a result of this simple old school technology called a printed magazine.
Yeah.
And mind you, I'm not an old school, I'm not a Luddite. I'm a tech guy. I love tech. I'll wear the latest wearable digital gadgetry. I'll, get 17 different SaaS systems, to help run our business. I love tech, but
Mhm.
there's a place for it. And then there's a place for an old school deliverable in a mailbox that everybody gets it. One of my early partners, one of our districts that was quite resistant to the idea initially, who
Mhm.
is now very much on board and in their fifth year of renewal, long after the grant monies are gone. This fella says, you know what I love most about the magazine? He said this recently at an IASA meeting. That's Illinois Association of School Administrators for those outside of Illinois. Um, he said to the table at the lunch, he said, what I love most about the magazine is it doesn't have a comment button. No comment button on the magazine. I thought that was brilliant, but so true.
I 100% agree. And I think most school leaders out there and teachers would agree with that statement as well. And, Craig, the thing I love about the magazine is, like I said before, you're highlighting and sharing the great things happening within the school. But then you're also fostering that sense of belonging by sharing with the entire community
Yeah.
what's going on. And
Yeah.
it's a core human need. It's a core desire of all of us, and
Yeah.
that is connection and belonging and community. And I do. I think this magazine really fosters that. But when you think about the budget,
Hmm.
I want to hit on this difficult topic because I know this
Sure.
was one of my biggest obstacles as a superintendent getting this magazine in my district. We
Hmm.
had grant money. And
Yeah.
so, with that grant money, that's how we did it for the time that I was in Mount Olive. But for other school leaders that might be contemplating this as an option for communication, for fostering that sense of connection and community, what advice would you give them in finding the resources to make it happen for them?
Well, the first thing I would say is talk to your peers around the state who have adopted this methodology for communicating and engaging their community. And I
Mhm.
think what you will find is that they were skeptics too, and they no longer are. There are zero skeptics in our partnerships, zero skeptics. And so, if you were to have your board president have a conversation with some of these colleagues, what you're going to find is that there is, a visceral commitment to this. It's not just an intellectual commitment, it's a visceral gut level commitment that people are having because they have seen what the response has been from their communities. That's number one.
Mhm.
That doesn't address the cost issue, however. So, let's talk a little bit about that. So it is a rather costly approach if you take the legacy method to this. The legacy method is 4 quarterly magazines. You don't have to do four, you can do three. In fact, you did three at Mount Olive.
Mhm.
But you can also do two. You can also do one. And then there's the option where perhaps you don't put them in mailboxes at all, but you put them at the local Casey's and you put them at the local diner and you put them at the Subway and you put them at the bank and you put them at City Hall. So now you're not mailing them. So you've gotten rid of a huge distribution cost, which is a big piece of the overall budget in this thing. You can do that. And if that doesn't work, you can do what my friend Greg Goins down in Joppa is doing, where you just do a digital only approach and use QR codes to connect people to the digital version of the magazine. You can put that on your sports programs that are handed out at the games. You can put them on the doorways of your businesses with a window cling, which we'd be happy to provide. You can do a lot of other things with it. You can get them out to your local churches if you like. There's tons of ways you can get these stories into the hands of your residents that do not break the bank.
Right.
But to tell the story in the first place is critically important.
Mhm.
It's also very important that you tell it in a personified way. And not to use a fancy framing on this, but I think it's important to understand the value that personification brings to a story. Nobody wants to hear about an elevator that'll get people up to the third floor because it's made out of hydraulic machinery that was manufactured in Milwaukee and has a 30-year lifespan. What they want to hear about is Bill Minert, the guy who's an alumni who's 92 years old or something like that, that
Mhm.
can't get to the third floor anymore to see his great granddaughter perform because that's where the auditorium is.
Yes.
That's personifying that story of an elevator, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And that's what education's all about. It's about the people, it's about the
Yeah.
relationships, and it's about the stories that you tell so beautifully in your magazine. And as you already said, there is that tech component with
Yep.
this as well, with the QR codes and being able to access these stories digitally. It's a beautiful way to share your story to the community. And even one of the things that I was told when I did this at Mount Olive was sharing the stories beyond the community of Mount Olive. There's so many people that they don't live here anymore, but this is their hometown. And they want
Yes.
to hear what's going on with the school that they graduated at in 1974.
Yeah.
And this gives them an opportunity. They may not get a tangible copy of the magazine, but they can read the stories online. And it fosters that sense of belonging again that we all want in our lives and in our leadership as well. And
Yeah.
thinking about that, Craig, in our lives and in our leadership, when we look at the education landscape right now, there's so much stress, there's so much anxiety.
Yeah.
I think at a higher rate than ever before, we are, yes, very connected with technology, social media, all of that, but probably the most isolated and lonely generation that I've seen since I've went into education. And I know you go across the state capturing these stories, hearing the great things happening in our schools. So, as we wrap up this show, I'm hoping you can share with me a beacon of hope, a story that is giving you hope for the future of education.
Well, I think the easiest way for me to land the answer that will resonate here is what I'm seeing in the young educators coming home.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many homegrown education stories we've had the opportunity, really the privilege to craft. Um, these are people who were raised by these communities. They're giving back, they're rediscovering pride in the schools that they are now building, but which helped shape who they are. And just seeing the quiet power of story still cutting through noise. Um, Ultimately, that gives me hope every single day.
Mhm.
Um, I mentioned the young man who suffered shaken baby syndrome earlier. He's 13 years old now. And his name is Pearson Eaker, and he goes to school at Monmouth Roseville Junior High School. He plays Freddie Mercury at all kinds of volumes in the lunchroom, and kids love him and they're high-fiving him. And I had an opportunity to meet him not only at the school but at his home, where I went to do the photography with him and his father Tim. And the whole community is inspired by this young man. But that story gave his story reach that it had not previously had. So when I can see others coming to the realization that not only does Pearson's life matter in a profound way, but the lives he has touched are incredible.
Yeah.
So we're all touching lives all the time. And so by moving it around and sharing those stories, I think we amplify hope, which is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. That ripple effect, it's a beautiful thing in our world. And, you know, thinking about these young people that are starting their lives. It made me think of just recently, my son Ryan sold his first house. He bought a house right out of high school. He started his own business and he sold that first house because he built his own house
Wow.
where he was raised. That was something that he wanted to do. Even as a young child, he would tell me that he was going to build a house on the back 30 of our property. And he has done that. And he sold his first house, but he sold it to a high school friend who is getting ready to get married, and his wife, who was my student when I was a principal at Ramsey Grade School, she is a sixth grade teacher. And so she is giving back and just watching life come full circle like that. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And the ripples, we don't know how far they're going to reach. We don't know, we may affect one person
That's right.
in our life or in our leadership, and we don't know where that ripple is going to reach in the big picture of life. So it
Right.
is a beautiful thing, and I love the stories you tell. I am a big advocate for Journey12 and all the work that you do. If somebody wants to get into contact with you and learn more about your business, about your stories, about the magazine, how would they get in contact with you?
Well, you can just find us online at journey12.com, and that's journey12, the numerals, journey12.com. Can certainly email me anytime you'd like at craig.williams@journey12.com. Would be delighted to have a conversation with anybody and everybody. And by the way, I make it part of my mission, part of what we're doing here to to help people. You don't have to purchase a single thing from us. If you just want to have a conversation about how you can improve what you're doing with your own communications at your school or your district, I'm happy to just have a conversation. And it's not in the service of a potential sale. It's just in the service because this is where my heart is. I've been brought to this work because I love it. I think it's important. And whether you buy a single thing or not from Journey 12, love to help you.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
Yep.
Loving people and serving everyone. And we are very aligned in our missions at Spark H.O.P.E EDU. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to help people. I want to help them to maximize their potential and
Yep.
to be the best version of themselves. And I want everybody to hear today that the world needs your leadership and change starts with you. So fuel your life with hope, embrace your purpose, and shine your light for others. Until next time, keep leading with hope.
That's what.
Are you feeling stuck in reactive leadership, exhausted by the constant demands and decisions? It's time to reset with the hope-fueled Leadership Kickstart, my focused, high-impact private coaching experience designed to help you lead with clarity and confidence, communicate your vision with purpose, build habits that restore balance and energy. As an award-winning educator and leadership coach, I'll help you create sustainable systems for resilient, intentional leadership from the inside out. Visit sparkhopeedu.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Now let's lead with hope, habits, optimism, purpose, and excellence. Thanks for tuning in to Lead with Hope, where we share stories and strategies to help you rise, lead, and redefine what's possible. If today's episode inspired you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more leaders like you who are ready to lead with heart, purpose, and resilience. Don't forget to visit sparkhopeedu.com for resources, upcoming events, and tools to help you build a culture of hope in your life and leadership. We're so grateful to be part of your journey. Until next time, keep leading with hope.